Hi, I'm Stacy. I love chatting about how to find our callings, preferably cozied up with steaming beverages in a coffee shop. You can connect with me on social media at Stacy Summerow and subscribe to stacysummerow.com for a free discernment packet called How to Make the Right Choice. God's adventure awaits, my friend, and I am thrilled you're on the journey with me. You guys, I'm so excited to be back. I cannot believe it has been so long since I've released an episode. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so here's what's been happening. I'm pregnant. Woo! So baby number 3 is on the way. I'm 14 weeks along right now, which means the baby's due in early March or, late February. That would be fine. So I don't have to be pregnant as long. It's been such a crazy summer. If you had told me everything that was going to happen this spring and summer, I would have said, I can't do this. There's no way. But somehow, it always seems impossible until it happens, until it's done, rather. I think that's a quote that somebody smart said. But it's been a crazy summer. It's been wonderful. I did the God's Adventure Awaits Summit, as you guys know, and I'm now teaching my True North Discernment course, which is like next level personalized, really exciting to have 92 people moving through that from 13 different countries around the world. Absolutely loving teaching that True North course. And the God's Adventure Awaits Summit was amazing in late July. It featured 44 maybe speakers. And we also had a meet and greet with religious communities and mission organizations. So there were 57 Zoom calls that happened throughout the weekend. That was amazingly successful. We had so many young women and young men meeting these religious orders, which is so cool because all of the conferences have been canceled for the summer. So their opportunity to meet new aspirants and missionaries was also canceled. So it was really cool to provide that forum. So that's been happening. And to be honest, I was so nauseous all through the month of July, eating uncontrollably to try to keep myself afloat. So it's been crazy. And I'm so glad that my exhaustion and my nausea is just, I'm pulling through that a little bit now and it's lessening. So prayers for this pregnancy would be very much appreciated. I've heard it said that the more nauseous you are, the healthier your baby is. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it really is, but I'm going to count on that. So I'm going to say that the suffering is all worth it. But I know the suffering is worth it because it's going to be a really beautiful baby. And Zelly and Rafi are already so excited. They think it's a baby Doral, whereas I think it's a baby boy. But I've been wrong both previous times. So they are very excited. Rafi's named the baby Lightbulb. And Zelly has named the baby Luluwa. To me, it sounds a little Hawaiian. So, we're just going to have a very international child here, / named after an inanimate object. Why not? So that's my personal update. Lots and lots and lots going on. But I tell you, just hearing this intro music as I was recording tonight, I'm like, I have missed you guys so much. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you have been around for every episode, welcome back. So happy to have you. As always, you are so welcome to join my Patreon community. If you would like monthly video chats with me and with our wonderful community, we have people who show up every time and I love them so much. They're so wonderful. So we have wonderful in-depth support for each other, which at this time, a virtual community, I feel is more important than ever, just because of the coronavirus and lockdown and everything. So feel free to come down and join us. You'll also get access to my secondary podcast called Coffee Sips, which is my faith and lifestyle show, minisodes of everything from fashion to my husband and I just did an episode about going through challenging times together as a couple, aka my first trimester of this latest pregnancy. And so there's just a smidgen of everything on there. And you also get some extra perks if you join at the level of Caffeinated Champions, which is $10 a month, but membership starts at just $5 a month. So not a lot of dough and a lot of support and wonderful benefits. So it helps support my ministry here with this podcast. So if you'd like to think about it, you could just, discern joining. Just go to patreon.com/calledandcaffeinated. I will be sure to put a link in the show notes for you. Great. So today's episode is with Dominick Albano. I want to thank Dominick in a very special way for his patience, as I have struggled to find the time to put adequate time into really doing his interview justice. He gave me so much of his time and his wisdom. He wrote a book called The Fundamental Theory of Happiness, published by Ascension Press. I'm really happy to let you guys know that if you use the code CALLED, you'll get 15% off when you order the book. The 15% off does not give me any kind of a kickback or profit. I'm just letting you know because I really want you to have the book, and this is just something special that Ascension is offering for you. So this is not an affiliate program. This is just you saving money from Ascension. You're welcome. So use the link in the show notes in order to order the book. Use the code CALLED, 15% off. Saving money is one of my passions in life, as you'll hear in the episode. So it's so worth the investment to go ahead and treat yourself to this book. I feel like what we talk about in this interview, we recorded all the way back on Ash Wednesday. And I'm finally just releasing it now, but I think what we talk about is more relevant now than ever because our world is going through so much. We've all been through so much this spring and this summer. I know a lot of young people are asking themselves, is this all there is? What am I doing with my life? Quarantine has been an opportunity for a lot of people to really think deeply about your lives. So this is such a timely, perfect, wonderful interview. And I just loved chatting with Dominick. So you're going to love it too. All right, let's get to it. Dominick, thank you so much for being my guest on Called and Caffeinated. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I just loved your book. We were talking off air a little bit about it, The Fundamental Theory of Happiness by Ascension, put out by Ascension Press. And I was so happy to get it in the mail. It's something really different. And I just wanted to compliment you on taking on a huge topic, happiness, in your very first book ever, which I would have expected this to be your 10th book, but this is your first book, which is amazing. And all my listeners should definitely check it out. But I am super excited to dive into this with you today. So are you drinking any coffee? Are you a coffee drinker?
I am a big coffee drinker, yes. And I'm a little bit of a coffee snob. Yeah, like all of us good millennials. And I had to be up at 3:00 this morning because I was being interviewed by the news for something starting at 5. And so I've had a lot of coffee, this morning.
We're going to be swinging from the chandeliers. It's going to be excellent.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting.
Are you a black coffee drinker?
I am. Yeah, okay. Strictly black coffee.
What is your coffee order? If you're a coffee snob, what does that mean?
Yeah. So, normally I brew myself, ideally with a French press, but no, it's going to be, I grind it myself, brew it myself. Typically just like a Starbucks, Pike Place, roast or espresso roast or whatever, French roast. Italian roast is my favorite, but I'm as long as it's a good whole bean, I'll grind it myself. But then if I'm going to Starbucks or something, I'm just getting an order of black coffee. Sometimes I might get like a cafe misto, with the steamed milk or like a red eye if I'm real tired and I want that extra shot of espresso in there. So
gotcha. Intense.
135 degrees, ideally, drinking temperature.
That's amazing. Yeah, all right.
I don't know if I don't think I've ever told anyone before the ideal temperature. Like, I don't know that my wife, I have ever told the ideal temperature of my coffee drink. And now you and all of your listeners are going to know it. So I'm actually a little embarrassed right now.
That's so funny. Stop. No, it's great. This podcast is all about discernment. And, I appreciate anyone who approaches coffee with a discerning eye and a discerning palate and a discerning heart. I think Father Mike Schmitz and I talked about his coffee order for a solid 7 minutes at the beginning of the show. And
really? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, we went down that rabbit hole. So I appreciate that. That's great.
No, I'm in good company.
Yes, exactly. So Dominick, what calls have you received from God in your life so far? And what did receiving those calls look and feel like?
What a great question, because like on a certain level, God called me to wake up this morning,
Yeah.
I think it's a saint quote, but there, this idea of like every next breath, we take every next breath because God called us to do it. And, I like that idea, but I like the idea too of these specific calls, right? Being a dad. So I'm a father to 4 boys,
Oh, God bless.
All under the age of 11. So obviously called to be a husband, right? My wife and I were high school sweethearts. So that was, shortly after we started dating. I mean, by like my freshman year of college, it was, I was still like discerning, but it wasn't just like I felt called to be married. It was like, I feel called to be married to this person. And that really came from, like, I felt like she made me such a better person. And especially in my freshman year of college, thinking like, I can't imagine pursuing holiness without having this person by my side. So that seemed like a really good reason for us to get married.
Yeah, that's a dang good one.
Yeah. So that's kind of what that call looked like. Thinking about like what did those calls look and feel like. When it comes to like being a dad, what's interesting about that is it was just such strong desire. I don't know if there was ever like are we called to be parents? It just was like assumed, right? Like we just assumed we were called to be parents. And then you get pregnant.
Say that, you say that when you take your wedding vows, they ask you, will you welcome children? And so there is, if you haven't talked about children before you get married, there's something very wrong. Or if you're not thinking that's going to be part of the picture, then that is something pretty, you need to talk about it. Yeah.
I'd say it's actually, what's interesting is, people always ask you to like, how many kids you're going to have. And we never had a number. It just never entered into our conversation or our like thoughts. But I will say it's more interesting now as we enter into like our late 30s, our mid to late 30s. And after having Ezra was the first time where it was like, oh, okay, we don't necessarily desire to like have another kid, or at least not right now. And that was the first time we ever felt that way. And so now there is much more of like every time we've had a kid, it's just like, all right, let's keep going. Let's keep having kids. And for the first time in our lives now, you actually have to discern call versus desire, which I think that's what all of this really comes down. What discernment really comes down to is, what do I want to do versus what does God want me to do? And a recognition that like happiness is ultimately going to be found in what God wants me to do. And so now it's like, okay, well, before I think God always wanted me to be a parent, and in a specific way to get pregnant, and that aligned with my desire. So that's great. But it always comes into, that always like the rubber hits the road when it's like, okay, does it align with my desire? I used to give a friend of mine a hard time in high school because whenever he felt like he, was attracted to a girl, he would tell me that, he really felt like God was calling him to date her. And then once they were dating and he didn't feel like as attracted to her anymore and he wanted to break up with her, he'd always say like, I really feel like God's calling me to break up with her. And I just pointed out, it's funny how God's calls really align with what you want. Isn't that convenient?
Isn't that nice? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I've had this theory since I discerned religious life, which I don't think you'll find in the catechism, but it just seems to be, it hasn't yet been disproven, but it seems to me that at the deepest level, God's calls, God's will is, in fact, it does align with our will. It's just that it doesn't always appear to in that moment. And so it's aligning your will with God's. And then you find out that he, in fact, does, because he does want you to be happy. His will is the deepest desire in your heart. The problem is that you don't necessarily know what your deepest desire is. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, when you're talking about the true deepest desires about holiness and happiness, which are, I think, the two things we were made for. God wants us to be holy and he wants us to be happy, and we are ordered towards those things, like by our creation, right? So, I'd 100% agree with that.
Yeah. I like what you said about feeling called to marry your wife, because it's such a huge area of stress. This question of, how am I going to know who I'm called to marry? And I like that you mentioned that you couldn't imagine pursuing holiness without her. And the reason I like that is because it seems like you guys just went along, you just dated, you did your thing. And then at a certain point, you just looked at the alternative of, okay,
if she's out of my life, this is what my life looks like. With her in my life, this is what my life looks like. And it just was obvious. There wasn't like you weren't trying to put the cart before the horse. You weren't.
Right.
It was just, okay, the alternative is she's in my life, she's out of my life. Well, the choice is easy, because you just kind of went along and you dated and you just let things progress as they progressed instead of stressing out too much about the question.
I do think we really overcomplicate discernment, specifically in the area of who am I supposed to marry, right? Because we just take a very a 2020 approach, right, to that discernment, where it's like, man, could you imagine people asking the questions we ask in the 1950s or in the 1900s or the 1850s, or God forbid, when there was arranged marriages, right? The point is, man and women were created to be together, right? That's the God designed us that way. And, I think I think a practical and simple approach to whether or not the person I'm dating is someone I should be married to, just keep it very simple. Desire is not the only thing, right? But that's certainly a part of it. And then beyond that, just what it's like to be married. Everything changes. Everything changes.
The ongoing choices are so important, and I find that with choosing to love my husband, it's like I promised to love him, and so we're going to continue to choose this in this moment. And we've already gone through so many transitions together. And for someone who's not married, this might sound a little overwhelming to be like everything's going to change, but
yeah, that's true. Sounds really dramatic.
What am I promising? Right.
I think it comes down to this, and I'm no expert in it, but this is what I consider the most romantic and powerful and simple way to say well, should I be, is God calling me to marry this person, yes or no? Is not are they worthy of my choice from now until the day I die? But do they view me as worthy of their choice from now until the day I die? Because as long as you're marrying someone who's who shares that value, right? That I'm going to choose to love you no matter what from now until the day I die. We always think about that as the one-way street from us to them, but this other person is choosing, it views you worthy of that choice. Right. And I don't mean to sound in a way that's settling, but that is so romantic and beautiful, right? To just step back for a minute. It's oh, this person wants to marry me. This person thinks I'm worthy of that choice from now until the day they die. Yeah, if you get to a point in a relationship where someone views you that way, that's pretty amazing. And and then it's, do you feel the same? So,
yeah. And as long as you keep giving that to each other, as long as you keep using that, I firmly believe there's nothing that can make your marriage fail, as long as you keep choosing to love each other, and keep choosing to put the other person first, as long as it's mutual,
Yeah.
Amen. So let's talk about your book. This is exciting. Yeah. Great. So I was reading it, and there was something you wrote, which comes up as a recurring theme in this podcast. There's a million quotable quotes in your book, but one of them that I loved was, if you're not happy before you do something or have something, you will not be happy after you do something or have it. What is good stuff. What does the life of a fundamentally happy person look like?
This quote's in there, right? If you're not happy before you have or do something, you'll not be happy after you have it or do it. I just think it's a recognition of a very human thing, which is we are always looking ahead, and we're always looking forward, and we're always looking for something else. And we always think that thing ahead, or that thing that is forward, or that something else that we will have or do will finally make us happy, right? You can express that idea in 1,000 different ways, right? One of the more popular ones is the God-shaped hole, right? We all have this God-shaped hole in our hearts, and we throw in there all these different things, trying to fulfill this, trying to fill this void, however you want to call it, right? It's just recognition of this truth. I think I put in the book, the story of my son. My son was basically, he loved, I think he was like 6 or 7 or 8 at the time. And he like loved baseball and he loved Legos and he loved like video games. And we had this conversation. It's like, how much would it take for you to be happy forever? And he kind of realized like, that it's ultimately not going to make him, these things aren't ultimately going to make him happy. And I think when you ask this question of what does the fundamentally happy person look like, there's a lot of different aspects to that. But, the idea of not wanting is a big thing, right? Like being totally satisfied and happy with things as they are, and not with this like chunk missing of, oh, I wish they were some other way. That's certainly a big part of it.
Yeah. I've heard it described as happiness is wanting what you have.
Another area we tangibly experience with is money or need to make like another dime. And then you get that and you're like, oh, if I just made like 80,000, if I just made 80,000, I'd be able to do all the things I'd ever want to do. And you make that and you're like, oh, I just need like 100,000. If I just make $100,000, if I just make 6 figures, I'd never need another dime. And the truth is, like, no matter how much you make, you'll find ways to spend it and you'll never feel like it's enough, and that's true if you're making 50 grand a year, if you're making 500 grand a year, if you're like, you got $5 billion, that's just another area. Enough is a word that is a lie in and of itself. Because there is never enough. It doesn't actually exist. Or it doesn't, no amount of having or doing will achieve enough. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So I know in writing your book, you interviewed and observed a lot of fundamentally happy people, as you described. Yeah. What do they, how do they move about their day, which is different than the fundamentally unhappy people?
Yeah. I just think as I looked at the world around me, there was just certain people that I could observe that I began calling fundamentally happy people that, and I think we all have this, right? Like people in our lives that if any one of your listeners just stop and you really think about it, make a list, like people who just seem like they're living life to the beat of a different drum, right? That they have things figured out that the rest of us don't understand, that their life just seems to work, or that, things don't seem to bother them the same way they bother other people. There's a lot of different ways to describe it. And I think there's a certain level of like, it's intangible and it's probably a little different for all of them. But when I looked at this group of people, part of what I wanted to do for this book was like take the happiest people that I knew and figure out like what makes them, what is it that gives them this kind of different way of doing life. And so, for some of them, it was just their daily habits of prayer or attending mass, or the way that they raise their kids, or just their general outlook on life. Like certain people that I was like, man, they just never seem like they're having a bad day, and I have bad days. Why the heck don't they ever have bad days? What are they doing that I'm not doing? And so, there's lots of different examples of that, right? I remember reading in, what's the title of the book? It's by Cardinal Dolan. And it's the lay-person version of Priest for the Third Millennium. And I'm blanking on the title of the book, but anyways, he writes this. That one.
Okay.
It's a great book.
I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. I think it's called and Gifted. I just Googled it.
Okay.
Called and Gifted.
That's not hard to remember because Called and Caffeinated is pretty similar. So
there you go.
Caffeine is a gift. So
there you go. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Called and Gifted.
Okay.
But it's definitely by Cardinal Dolan. But he tells a story of this cancer patient, terminally ill, being taken care of by Sisters of Charity. He's on his deathbed, and he is not Catholic, definitely living a life very far from the church, but converts basically on his deathbed because he looks at these nuns and is like, what do they have that I don't have, right? Like they're doing the worst possible work anyone can do, and they're like joyful about it, like they must have something that I don't have. And so that's his version right? Of recognizing that like these fundamentally happy people. And so, yeah, I mean, part of the book was wanting to figure out what makes them tick. Part of it was wanting to look at reputable, evidence-based research around happiness. What is just like the secular world recognize as truth about happiness? And how does all of that like point us back to God?
Yeah. And what you're pointing out in there is starting with that dissatisfaction, which is the first step to becoming fundamentally happy, as you wrote in the book.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a great thing to examine. I certainly notice that there are a lot of people around me. I'm, a young parent and friends with a lot of other young parents who are starting their life. And I remember also when I was single, just kind of asking like the question, is this all there is? Which sounds like such a spoiled question to ask. And in a way it probably is, because we certainly have our needs provided for. But I think you kind of can sometimes get into a rut just asking yourself, okay, I'm supposedly living the dream, but is this all there is? And that's a really good starting place.
We have like in American society, we have like ruined our kids and we were ruined too, because the truth is we raise children here in a way that conditions us for this idea that what we have or do is going to make us happy, right? Because we start at a very young age, like and I'm not even saying like I'm raising my kids the same way. Okay. So I'm not condemning it in the sense of like, I don't have a better way proposed, but right. Like our entire lives until we hit about like 30, 35 are all about what's next, right? It's all about, you're born and you go to school. And it's like, well, starting in grade school, you start thinking about middle school, and then you start thinking about high school, and then you start thinking about college,
resume,
thinking about getting a job, and then you start thinking about getting married, then you start thinking about having kids, then you start thinking about like your career, really, really getting somewhere, right? And that takes you till you're about like 30, ish, right? For most people, it might be 40, right? But like, let's give it a 15-year period of 27 to 43. Where you're in this period where you're like, okay. I graduated, right? I did that. I graduated and I got married and I had the kids and I've got the job and I've got money now. And, what's next? What am I supposed to, now some people get really good at like, developing a career trajectory that always gives them a what's next,
Yes.
And they're like, well, they don't get to ever ask the question of what's next until they're finally like the CEO of some, multi-billion dollar corporation. So they always have that like built in. But I think for a lot of people, you get to this place where you're like, okay, I did all the things they said I was supposed to do. And now what? And I think when you get there, that's where you're confronted with this idea of like, oh yeah, like I'm never like what's next is not going to make me happy, right? Like if that's what going back to that idea of like having and doing, if that's what I was always searching, like if the answer is just this roller coaster of, okay, I guess I'm supposed to make more money and take more extravagant vacations and drive nicer cars and have more kids, I guess, it's like at a certain point, the merry-go-round breaks down.
Yes.
And so I have to search for this other way. And this other way is just being dissatisfied with the things the world tells us we're supposed to have or do. And that's not my original thought. That's like a C.S. Lewis thing, right? He's got this great idea of, that at the end of our lives, God doesn't find that most of us wanted too much, but finds that we wanted far too little, right? And he's got that quote about we're like children playing in the mud, making mud pies, who can't imagine how great it is to have a holiday at sea,
Yes, that is such a wonderful quote.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those areas where our faith, if we don't make it beyond a confirmation level of education in Catholicism, this doesn't, we can call ourselves Catholic, we can go to Mass every Sunday, and yet we can still live exactly as the world is telling us we should be living and wanting all the things that the world tells us that we want. This is one of those areas of deeper conversion that I absolutely you have to really dig into it, because it's not obvious. And this is, but I think it's one of those areas where if you really do dig into it and find the answer in your faith, it's going to transform everything. And I'm thinking of Pier Giorgio Frassati. I don't know if you know that much about his life, but he was a total baller. He was. So he died at age, I think, 24, something like that.
Yeah, 23, 24. Yeah.
Yep. Never figured out what his vocation was. He brought a couple of girls home to meet his family, but he never never figured out what's coming next, what his family's, what his vocation is. And so he wasn't following that trajectory of what the world says, and he also, I think he maybe just finished his education right before he died. But he was living very backwards according to what American society would tell us is good, because he was spending his money and his resources and his time and his energy visiting poor people, encouraging his friends to go to adoration. He would I think he would have contests, and if he won, then everybody had to go to adoration for an hour, that kind of thing. And he was doing things that were not what the world says you should be doing, but doing the right things. Like, he already had that focus of understanding none of this stuff is really going to make me happy. I'm just going to love God with my whole heart now. And sometimes that's going to mean sacrificing what's the more practical thing. For example, I think he gave, and I'm not saying that everybody is called to do this, but I think he basically gave all his money away. Like, he didn't have any money by the time
he would do it all the time. He would just see someone who didn't have a coat, and he would give them the coat off his back with no thought of where am I going to get another coat? Or what if I'm cold? He would just do it, right? Or he'd show up at home sometimes without shoes for the same reason. He'd see someone who needed a pair of shoes, and he'd give them their shoes. And I think a cynical person could say, well, he knew he came from a wealthy family and so could just go get more. But I really think he was just living in the moment, He was
just thinking with the kingdom mindset.
Yeah. What if I die in 5 minutes? Guess what? I don't need this coat anymore.
Exactly.
And, I think living
sorry, go ahead.
Just living with that kind of a mindset is always going to look so bizarre to the world.
Yeah. Right. And him, of all people, he would have been conditioned for success because his father was the editor of a highly successful newspaper, and he grew up in a very wealthy home. And he was also conditioned to not take his faith seriously, because he used to always say his grace for meals outside the door because his father didn't want him to. And so, but he would always take those 5 seconds, not 5 seconds, but 30 seconds, a 1 minute or whatever. They'd hear his footsteps coming up to the door, and then he'd stop for about 30 seconds to say grace before he actually came in the room. So he just, there was a lot of resistance against him pursuing holiness in a way that maybe wouldn't be obvious to the rest of us. But once you read about his life, it was amazing. And then who came to his funeral? Apparently the church was packed with people that he had been helping. And he kind of went around in disguise, not exactly disguise, but he just wouldn't tell people who he was, and he would just come and help them. And they all showed up to his funeral. And so what a testament.
People showed up, right?
Yeah. What an amazing, by age 24, what an amazing testament to who he was and to his values that he lived out. And it wasn't, his money didn't show up at his funeral, and his status didn't show up at his funeral. It was the people that he had helped. And I think that's such a great question, or great thing to take to prayer, is who would show up at my funeral?
Yeah.
Boom, it's Ash Wednesday. We're just laying it on.
Hey, the church has never been shy about reminding people that you're going to have a last day. That's a reality. And what's that last day going to look like? And what's it going to look like? Yeah. What's your funeral going to look like? I love that scene in, the movie Castaway. Just not that this is a podcast where we want to talk about Tom Hanks movies, but oh,
that's fine.
But there's this great scene in that where right after he's found, right, he's picked up and he's on the plane and he's flying back, for his big unveiling after he's, Tom Hanks's character has been, on this deserted island for whatever, it's a couple of years, and his best friend's we had a funeral for you. And he asks, you had a funeral for me. What did you put in the coffin? And he starts the guy starts talking about the stuff they put in his coffin. Because we didn't have a body, we just put stuff in your coffin. I think we put in a beeper, and we put in some Elvis CDs, and we put in a hat for the Rangers, and you can just see, Tom Hanks' character, like there's like this subtle but profound sadness in his facial expression at like, oh, this is what my life was. This is what was like the people closest to me said, oh, this is what his life was all about. This is what we would put in his coffin. Here's another good one for your for you and for your listeners. Just the other day, I was riding with my boys in the car, and I don't know where it came from. It just kind of came out of nowhere. But I asked the 10-year-old, I said, Anthony, if you were talking to someone and they didn't know our family at all, like they didn't know anything about us, and they were just like, hey, like tell me about your family. Like, give me like 3 words. What's your family all about? What's your family about? What 3 words would you use? And I asked my son that, and I thought, man, that's another good, you want some like truth that will cut to your core. Ask your kid that. I'm very happy to report that he said God, the Chicago Cubs, and family were his 3 things that he said. And I felt real good about that. I was like, great. Slam dunk. As long as we stick to those 3, I'm okay.
We're doing something right.
We're doing something right.
Hopefully with the family slightly before the Cubs, but
yeah, at least God was first. I'll take God being first,
Can you just briefly explain the 5 levels of perception and what it means to live at the deepest level of perception?
Yeah, it's so the 5 levels of perception are basically just, it gets at that, some people, it seems like they're living life on a different level, right? We say this, we just use this, they just seem like they're living life differently, or they're at a different level than the rest of us. What does that actually mean? How do we react to the world around us? And how does it have an impact on our own experience of life? And so it's just a way to organize thoughts around what you choose to react to, because we can't choose much in life, but we do choose how we react to things. There's another saint who talked about like the difference between harm and pain. He said anyone can cause you pain because that's physical. Nobody can cause you harm, because the only thing that harms you is being separated from God, and only you can choose to separate yourself from God. And I that's just such a beautiful way to put, like, we choose our reactions, right? And so we can't control the things around us, but we choose how we react. So that's what the 5 levels of perception are all about. So quickly, they're the surface level, the most surface level is the effects, right? Just you look at the world around you, and you just see what's going on, and you're very reactive to what's going on around you.
Drama.
Drama, right? Drama. And some people love living at that level.
Crisis, yes.
Crisis, etc.
Right.
So the next level deeper is effect, is cause, right? You have effects, and what is the cause of those effects? And that gets a little bit below the surface. Okay, what's really going on here? The example I use in the book is like, my wife's mad at me is the effect. Okay, why is she mad at me? That's the cause, right? And I mean that to be a little humorous, but for any of the dads out there, they definitely know they know the experience, right? Okay, what did I do? So then a little deeper than the cause is the circumstance, right? Okay, what are the surrounding issues, the circumstances around the cause. Okay. So if the effect is my wife's mad at me, and the cause is, I got home late from work. All right. What are the circumstances? Okay. And I might say to her, oh, honey, there was traffic on the interstate, and my boss was a jerk and made me stay late. And I might talk about the circumstances, trying to justify the cause or the effect, right?
I see. So when you say like a victim of circumstance, that's exactly what that means. Okay.
And this is, we do this all the time, right? I'm home late, I'm tired, and it's all because of this, right? We justify the effects or the causes that we're responding to.
That's why
living at this level of circumstance,
yes,
right? Our choices.
That's why I was late for this call, because my computer took 15 minutes to boot up. Yep.
Absolutely. No, I mean, and that's, we tend to live either here. So this is where most people, you're either living at the level of circumstance or one level deeper, which is intentions, right? And intentions are one level deeper than the circumstances. it's here that we say, we usually judge other people by what they do. So up on the levels of like cause and effect, but we judge ourselves by our intentions, right? So if something goes wrong, we say, I didn't mean for that to happen, right? So, it's like, we see this with our kids a lot. They screw something up and they say, well, I didn't mean for that to happen. And it's like, yeah, okay, but still you didn't do X, you didn't do the things, that would have prevented that. Right. So, again, going back to my example, the effect is my wife's angry. The cause is, I came home late from work. The circumstances are my boss is a jerk. The intention, right? If I get to the intention, sometimes this can diffuse everything, right? Because if, I didn't, that's what I'm going to say to my wife is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be home late. Okay. Now my wife, if she is living at this level, might say, I know, like if I'm home late from work, she can live, like that's the effect, right? That's like the circumstance she's experiencing. That's this shallower level, and she can be angry about that. If she's living at this level of intention, she might say, oh, Dominick's home late from work. He never means to be late, home late. He knows it's important to me that he's home on time. When I hope he's okay. I hope something didn't happen. I wonder if there's traffic. I wonder if, right. And it changes her whole experience, right? If she's living at the level of intention, it changes her whole experience. And then of course my whole experience, because she's not as angry when I get home. I didn't care, to use your example, you were on like a couple minutes late. I didn't care, like I wasn't worried about that. I wasn't sitting around saying, oh, what's going on? Because I assume good intentions about you. And here's where I always bring up, like it used to be, 50 years ago, Catholics would talk about this all the time, and it's kind of fallen out of vogue, but I think it's really important to get back into it, which is that the church, it used to be viewed as Christian duty to assume the good intentions of the people around you. And I think I tried to fill the books with stuff like this. Like if you just took away this one thing and changed just this one way you live, it would have a profound impact on your life. I wanted there to be hundreds of things like that in the book, just so that it really was a life-changing read for people. And this is an example of one of those. I use the example in the book of like, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, you can get angry about that. You can flip in the bird. You can say, what a jerk. But if you knew that the person in front of you was, had their wife in the front seat, she was in labor, it's 10 weeks premature, he's got to get to the hospital as quick as he can, life depending on it, you'd pull out of the way, right? You'd pull to the side, you'd put your flashers on, you'd say a prayer for them, right? The only thing that changes about this whole circumstance is what you assume about the other person. And that's 100% our choice. We can assume they have good intentions, or we can assume they have bad intentions. And if we assume they have good intentions, you just will live a happier life. Like that's just a reality. So, assuming good intentions about the people around you, we used to teach it as Christian duty. We don't teach that anymore. We absolutely need to get back to that. And then I've been talking a long time. The fifth level, the deepest level.
This is good.
Good. You can edit it out if you'd like. The fifth level, the deepest level is purpose, right? That who am I made to be, and what am I made for? Who is the other person? What are they made for? If I'm living at that level, or just, what's my relationship to another person? Again, going to the example of my wife, if I'm living at the level of purpose, and I'm saying, oh, my wife's mad at me, but I go, hon, I'm sorry. It's important. I'm your husband. It's important for you to be able to depend on me and to feel protected by me. And part of that, making you feel safe is that knowing that you can really rely on me, that if I say something, that it's going to happen. And so I'm sorry that I wasn't home late. I should have, and really, if I'm living at the level of purpose, that means 3 hours ahead of time, I'm going to call her and I'm going to tell her why, hey, I'm going to readjust the expectations. So there's like a domino effect, right? If you're living at the level of purpose, you never even get to some of these effects because, there's like a preventative nature around that. So it's, but the world is always trying to draw us to the level of effect. It's always trying to draw us to the shallow, and God exists and we exist. Like we are happiest at the deeper levels, right? Living at this level of purpose of who am I? Am I living out who I am? And what am I meant to do? And am I doing what God has created me to do? When we're there, right? That's when we're the happiest.
Yes. Oh my gosh. A lot of that cut really deep with this situation that I am currently in with this. So I'm a one woman show, and there's a vendor of mine in Texas, or contractor, whatever you want to call her, who's refusing to pay me. And it's been 3 months of emails and so forth. And, as I'm talking with my husband, well, what do I do? My legal options for pursuing this are limited. And, are we just going to let her break this contract and get away with it? And that's kind of living at there is an injustice there, and it's living at the level of effect. Or maybe circumstance, but it's not living at the level of intention or purpose. And, and my husband is very wise, and he was advising me. He was like, basically don't let this circumstance or this effect ruin your deeper purpose. Like, if she breaks this contract, in God's wisdom, in God's kingdom, in His justice, it will be paid for. It will be taken care of. Basically, you're in the better position if you are, if you're looking at your purpose and you allow someone to do an injustice to you like that, because you're living out your purpose instead of going for the effect. You're looking at, what am I supposed to be doing in this world? Who am I supposed to be? How am I supposed to behave? And as long as I'm behaving with character in every one of my interactions toward her, I can have peace regardless of what actually happened.
Absolutely. And within that, like, we are not called as Christians to be doormats either, right? Like, justice is just as much a part of the gospel as mercy. And getting paid won't make you happy.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's so good. So talking about our purpose, living at the level of purpose. You wrote in your book, we define everything in the world by its purpose except ourselves. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I was praying one night, and I was alone, and this kind of stuff, right? This stuff you write about, it does come from it comes from your wounds, right? It comes from the places where, like, life has been difficult. And so none of this stuff just comes from nowhere, right? So I this was a long time ago, but I was sitting in my prayer chair in my living room, and I was alone, and I was just praying about life and, like, who I was and what I was meant to do with my life. And I don't remember the exact circumstances that I was praying about, but I remember I was looking at, it was kind of an epiphany moment. I was looking at this clock on the wall, and it's my wife. It belonged to my wife's grandmother. We had a very close relationship with her, very holy woman. And it's one of those, it's got like the octagonal wood face, and then the chime hangs underneath, and it swings back and forth. And it was dead, right? Like, it just needed batteries. But I'm looking at it, and I started thinking about the fact that, like, it's not working, right? Like, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And it's not.
You had one job.
It had one job to tell the time, and it's not telling the time. But that didn't stop it from being a clock, right? Like, if somebody, was an idiot and they're in my living room and they're like, "What's that?" I'd still say, it's a clock, right? I would describe it as, it's a clock. I would never point at it and say, oh, that's like a set of gears and turning dials that has these, knobs and levers on it that if they spin a certain way and align to these different numbers, I can tell you what time it is. I would just say, it's a clock. It tells time, right? Like, I would define it by its purpose, right? Its purpose is to tell time. And even if it was broken, I would say that's what it was. Even if it was a painting of a clock, I would say, oh, that's a clock. Even if it's I'd say, oh, that's a clock. So this idea that, like, we define everything in life by its purpose, by what it's supposed to do, right? By why it exists. But we don't do that ourselves. When someone says, who are you? I list off all the features, right? I say, the first thing we love to say is what our job is, right? Like, the point is, we describe all the things that can be changed. It doesn't matter if you're pointing at a clock like my grandmother's, or like one that you'd picture in like a school classroom, or a digital alarm clock on your bedside table. All of those are clocks, right? And if someone said, "What's that?" You'd say a clock. "What's that?" You'd say a clock. "What's that?" You'd say a clock. But for ourselves as individuals, we try to, you say, "Well, who are you?" And we try to answer it by these real, "Oh, this is my job, and this is my name, and this is where I live, and this is like who I'm a fan of in sports, and this is okay." All this stuff that really can go away, right? Like it doesn't actually describe who we are. So it's like someone saying, "What is that?" And you saying, "Well, it's a series of turning dials and knobs and switches and numbers and blah, blah." It's all of that stuff that is secondary to our purpose. And so I think this idea of we defining everything in the world by its purpose except ourselves gets at the point that there is something deeper than what we look like and how much we weigh and how smart we are and how much money we make and what kind of car we drive and where we live and all these other features that we tend to define ourselves by, that ultimately can be, stripped away, very quickly. As I started thinking through like this question of how we define ourselves, I started asking, the fundamentally happy who we mentioned earlier. And this one lunch, I had lunch with this guy, his name was John. And I started asking him, really this idea of like, I started talking to him about all this, and this idea had occurred to me that like, okay, if we have a purpose, if there's something we're made for, obviously like the Christian goes right to, okay, what did God create me for, right? Like, why did he make me? What am I supposed to do with my life? What is that purpose? And he told me this story that really changed the way I thought about that question. Because I think even in discernment, right, to your idea of like discernment, so much of it is like, God, what do you want me to do? Right? Like, that's what we're trying to figure out. Like, okay, God made me for a purpose. What is it? And he told me the story and it was about his son. His son was an adult. He's actually a little older than me at the time we were having this conversation, but he just remembered when his son was really young. He was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and they were at like Thanksgiving dinner, and John's older sister was there and with her husband, and John's older sister was talking to their mom, and the mom was getting on her about when is she going to have kids? How come her and her husband don't have kids? And this John's sister, was talking about how happy they are without kids and how they're able to travel, and neither one of them has had to sacrifice their careers. And this was 20 years ago. This is a very common conversation today. It wasn't as common, back in the 90s when this conversation was happening, but it was very similar to a conversation here today. And what happened was John's son heard his aunt, right, John's sister, having this conversation. And so that night, John's putting his son to bed, and John's son is like really upset. And he's like, "Dad, why did you have me?" And John's kind of like, where, 7, 8-year-old son's asking this. He's like, "Where's this coming from?" And the son goes and like recounts this conversation that he overheard. And he's like, "I don't do anything for you and Mom. Like, do I really make life that much more difficult for you? Like, why did you have me?" And, he told me just like how heartbroken he was, right? For like his 7-year-old in that moment, right? It's just like, you have your kid ask you this like heartbreaking question. But he said, he told his son, like, "I didn't have you to do anything for your mom or me. That's not why we had you. It wasn't to like achieve something or to do something." He said, I love your mom a lot. And you were born out of that love. And he told me the story, and he said, I think you're asking God, like, why did you have me? What do I do for you? What am I supposed to do? How do I make your life better? Right? Like some version of that question. And John said to me, like, I don't think God creates us so that we can do something. Like, I think he just loves us.
Yeah.
And that was like, it's one of those things that I think this is true about a lot of stuff in the spiritual life, which is you can tell someone something, and then God, who is truth, right? Jesus called himself the truth, truth, you can encounter a truth. And that's what I think when the church speaks about like encountering God, right? Like an encounter with Jesus. Like, I think that's what it is, right? It's when a truth about our faith goes from your head to your heart. When you actually encounter in a way that it's like that teenager who their whole lives has been told that God loves them. And then they go on a retreat and they're like, oh my gosh, God loves me. And you're like, yeah, I know, you've been told that 1,000 times. You're like, that's what an encounter with God really is. And for me, that was one of those encounter moments, right? Like, I could have told you in an intellectual way that God created us to be loved by him, but it was the first time I actually encountered that truth in a personal and powerful way.
I totally hear you. Yeah, there's something about being told you're a child of God, but that doesn't, you're like, what does that mean? What does that really mean? I'm made in God's image. Okay, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And it means that you are effortlessly lovable.
Yeah.
Without having to, and I realized this when I was doing my hair, I was getting ready for a speaking engagement. And, as a woman, you're expected to put in effort to your appearance. You're expected to do your hair and do your makeup. And I'm very happy to do those things. And so I was doing them and I was just kind of asking my heart, like, what is it that you really want? And my heart just came back and was like, I just want to be effortlessly lovable. I don't want to have to put on makeup or do my hair or do anything to be lovable. Like, I want people to just want to be in relationship with me.
Yeah.
And then I think all of the history of our faith and all the tradition and the scripture just came right back around and was like, wait a minute, you are effortlessly lovable. You didn't do anything to get yourself here. And you are effortlessly, without putting in any effort of your own, you're made in the image of love himself.
That's awesome.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I love that. Effortlessly lovable.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
It is.
We all have some version of that, right? We all have, in my speaking, I like to talk about how, the devil is the father of lies, right? Like, that's a title we have for him, and he tells us lies, right? And the lie is always around the idea that you're not lovable, right? Yes. That something about you makes you unlovable, and you have to achieve love, right? That is the central lie. Now, he's diabolical in that he customizes that, right? Like, he customizes the lie individually to every one of us. So when my parents got divorced when I was 9, I learned that I was not loved, I was not chosen, and I was alone, right? That's how he customized that lie that I'm unlovable to me, right? Was through those three things. And so, even today, we never really lose those lies, but God wants to speak truth into them, But, even today, like, if I get in a fight with my wife, right, what is the fear that shoots through me? Like, oh, I'm unloved, right? She doesn't really love me. Why are we having this fight? I'm not chosen. She doesn't really want me. I'm not good enough. I'm alone. She's going to leave me, and you have to battle that, right? To be fundamentally happy, right? You have to recognize those. You have to encounter them in a very deep and personal way. Recognize that they're lies. Encounter the truth. Know that you're loved by God. Live at that level of your purpose. That you're God's beloved son, and that these lies are just what they are. They are lies. Yeah,
and you can't do that unless you know what God is actually saying about you. Yeah. Which is something that I think. I don't know about your background, but for me, I never grew up reading the Bible or memorizing scripture or any of that. I was a good little Catholic girl. And so the lies of the devil seemed so real because I had nothing to replace them with. I had no proof or no words coming from God that really spoke to me to tell me who I actually am to him. And when you read the Bible, it's all in there. It's God defending his people, being a good dad, getting the Israelites out of Egypt, getting his children out and giving them the promised land and affirming them over and over again and bearing with them in all of their sins. And when you really look at the truth and start to let it seep into your head and your heart and really chew on that and process that, then you have something to fight the devil with. And then you have something with which to combat the lies. And you brought up in your book too, it's so important to have silence, and that we're not going to know our purpose without silence. And you also rightly pointed out in the book that it's never going to be something that people are going to be like, oh, good job. You spent your 15 minutes meditating today. Oh my gosh, great job. That's never going to be, because you go on Instagram and, as like a mompreneur, I get all of these ads of these other entrepreneurs or whatever trying to get me to sign up for their course. And the message is always, you got to hustle, you got to work smarter, you got to be more productive, you got to be reaching more clients, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so no one's going to be like, oh, good job for not doing anything.
Silence is not profitable in the eyes of the world.
Exactly. And that's so important to point out, because I know so many people who feel guilty when they don't do something that's productive, or when they do something that's unproductive. Somehow it's easy to justify like, oh, I'm just vegging out, like, watching Netflix, but spending actual time in profitable silence, which is, time with the Lord, is somehow the devil makes it look like it's wasting time, but it's not. So it's not funny how that works.
Oh yeah. And I think we get caught up even within our prayer, right? Of like, well, what have I done? What have I achieved during my prayer? Am I reading? Have I read all the spiritual books that everyone else has read? Am I as contemplative as everyone else is? Have I said the right words? Have I avoided distraction enough? And it's just like, what if you just sit there and you really were convinced of the idea that God loves you effortlessly, right? Effortlessly loves you. And that prayer is not a productivity tool. That it is not, you cannot have productive or more productive or less productive prayer, and that's a little countercultural. It's a little, I do think we want to avoid a distraction, but I also, I just think I think that prayer and silence is much more about what God wants to do than what we want to do.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's tempting to walk away from my prayer time and be like, I didn't get anything out of it. I don't feel any different. But when I think about my playtime with my children, because they're toddlers, they're not in school or anything. And I just think about like, what did I do with them today? And the measure of whether or not we had a good day is really just, did we have good, fun, peaceful time together? Yeah. Okay. It was a good day. There was no purpose of like, did they learn, their ABCs, and did we work on the colors, learning all the colors and the animal sounds? It's like, I don't approach my relationship with my children that way, or my husband either. Did we meet our quota of hours spent together this year, of date nights? And it's like, no, that you're missing the purpose. The purpose of a date night is to spend time together and to just deepen your relationship. It's not to check off any quotas. Now, that being said, I find that we do have to be very intentional about scheduling a date night. We have to say, I'm setting aside this time to spend with you because I know that my life is going to get busy, and that I'm going to, if we're not careful, a whole month is just going to get away from us, and we're not going to have, a date. So scheduling that time is important. But once you get to that time, the purpose isn't to accomplish something. It's just to be with him. Right. And it's so true that, that we can sometimes treat our relationship with God that way. So, oh man, one of my favorite quotes from your book is about the permanent principle. And I had never thought about this before. So you wrote that any aspect of your life is related to your purpose in direct relation to its permanence.
Yeah, it's a little wordy, isn't it?
It takes a minute. It takes a minute, especially, for those of us who aren't audio. That's not a word. What's the word?
Oral.
AURAL. Yeah. For those of us who aren't oral learners, I'll just say it again. Any aspect of your life is related to your purpose in direct relation to its permanence. So what does that mean? And how does it inform how we should be living?
Yeah, I think it's as complicated as the sentence is, and that is the least complicated way I could figure to express it in one sentence. The idea is pretty simple. Describe yourself, or take the labels you would place upon yourself. The more permanent something is, the more directly related to your purpose it is. So I am an employee at X company. Okay. Well, I am married to this person. 10 years from now, I may or may not be, or let's say a better example, even the marriage. Let's say I am this person, I'm Anthony's dad. Okay. 10 years from now, I might not be an employee where I am now. That could be a reality. But no matter what, 10 years from now, I will be Anthony's dad, right? Like that, even if I am dead, that relationship doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
It is permanent, right? Mm-hmm. 50 years after I'm dead, Anthony will say, "Oh, my dad is," and he'll say my name, right? Like that relationship will still exist. It will change in the fact of whether or not I can speak to him and how I interact with him. It can even change to the extent of how close our relationship is, and are we fighting? Are we speaking? Are we not? Mm-hmm. And it's not biological, right? Like being that relationship is biological, but anyone who has had estranged parents or they're adopted also knows that being a parent is not strictly biological. Actually,
an interesting point that I found out pretty recently about Roman society is that if you adopted a child, that was a permanent choice. That was irrevocable. Whereas for what I don't know if that means that you could abandon your biological children legally, but I know that when St. Paul talks about a spirit of adoption, what he means is complete permanence. That was the most secure way of assuring a child's future, was to adopt him. So isn't that interesting? That
is really interesting.
Yeah. So an adopted parent was considered even more of a parent than a biological parent, which is crazy.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you think about the permanent principle, the idea is just look at your life. What is permanent? What is not permanent? Mm-hmm. The permanent things are the things that really have to do with who you are. So if you're really trying to discover your purpose, discover what you were made for, what God created, why God created you, look to the permanent things. Of course, what is the most permanent thing is our relationship with God, right? Mm-hmm. Everything else has some level of impermanence. Okay. Our bodies are going to change. Our bodies are going to physically decay and die, right? Like that aspect of our life is not permanent. Emotionally, most of us are emotional train wrecks that can't hold an emotion from 1 minute to the next. So that's definitely not, a way that we can, there's no permanence there. Our intellectual life is constantly changing. Our relationships, they can come and go. Friendships, somebody you're friends with 1 year, you're not friends with the next year, you move, that sort of thing. But there's certain things about our lives that are more permanent than others. And our relationship with our kids, our relationship with our spouse are certainly high up there. Mm-hmm. But our relationship with God, of course, is the pinnacle. And so you can almost kind of reverse engineer what are you called to by these permanent relationships. And so it's like, what are you ultimately called to? You're ultimately called to be a child of God, right? Like that's where we're at. And then for me in particular, it's like, all right, well, let's continue to peel back the layers. It's like, I'm a father, right? Like that's the next thing. Then I'm a husband, I'm married, I'm a husband, right? Like that's pretty permanent. And then you can almost like continue to pull back after that. So if I define myself by my job and how much money I make, I'm going to be in real trouble because those things can change so easily. And you do see this, right?
Oh, yes.
I know a lot of people who, they define themselves by their title or how much money they make or where they live, and those things change, and they are just, cast into the wind in terms of their how they feel about themselves and about their life, because the things they were clinging to have all of a sudden changed. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I certainly remember vividly the years of my life where what I weighed was the measure of whether or not I was good enough. Yeah. And that was my whole purpose, was to be under, X number of pounds. And certainly I see that with other people around me too, because I speak about self-image. I have a lot of people who open up to me about their self-image issues. And I know it's a big problem for many women of, if I look this age, I'll be happy. And if I weigh this amount, I'll be happy. And once I get to my goal weight, I'll be happy. And that's living at the very low level of permanence. Like that could change any time. And that could certainly change your if you got in a car accident, you could lose both your legs. And so is your happiness dependent on that? Absolutely. And certainly just,
and men struggle with that too, of course. Don't ever think you guys are alone in that. There's plenty of men who, they're, are
Losing their hair seems to be a big thing for guys. Is that true?
So, yeah, I'm 35. Okay. And I'm not, I mean not to boast, but I have a fairly luscious head of hair. And I can say this because you have no idea how many grown men, my friends, right? Friends of mine who will just look at me and be like, oh God, I wish I had your hair.
That is hilarious.
It is so bizarre, right? It is so bizarre, but it's true. Yeah. I mean, whether it's hair loss or weight.
Yeah.
I think the thing that especially married men struggle with when it comes to sexuality is all about like, am I desired by my wife? Like I think a lot of men have that as and that's like the root like question, right? And so for some, it's like, am I funny enough? For some, is it, do I make enough money? But I do think for a lot, it's how much do I weigh and how do I look to them physically? It could be performance related, but like the root of it is like, I think women want to be loved and men want to be desired in some sense. And speaking in very broad strokes and very crude terms, right? But men struggle with those things as well, just in different ways.
Yeah. It's been really inspiring to me to watch my dad go through chemotherapy. He just finished yesterday, actually. His hair is gone. And it's been really inspiring to watch him just lose his hair and be poked with needles and go through so much change and transformation. And he didn't have that much hair left to begin with, but it doesn't bother him to lose the rest of it. He just he calls himself Uncle Fester now. And it doesn't seem to bother it. It really genuinely doesn't seem to bother him. So it's so interesting when we're living out of our purpose, and we talked about Pier Giorgio Frassati and how he was living for that purpose, which doesn't make sense in the eyes of the world, but he was doing the reverse engineering thing that you're talking about, where he started with being a child of God. What does that mean? I'm going to live that out and then let the rest follow.
Yeah.
And certainly, I love that you provide a lot of scientific research in your book as well. And there was this one part where you talked about a study that said that I think they researched about 1,500 people, and they found that the more you go to church, the happier you are. So how did they find that out? I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. I do want people to know. I always like telling people this. My wife has her PhD in neuroscience. Okay. And so when I was setting out to write this book, I think there's just a lot of like false, like everyone's an expert on happiness and there's like studies about it. And so I kind of charged her, who she does research for a living. I was like, I want reputable studies. I want evidence-based research from reputable institutions about happiness. I don't want Uncle Bob's House of Learning, where at Thanksgiving dinner, he asked all his friends and family about what it means to be happy, right? Like, I don't want that. I want like Oxford and Princeton and MIT. And so I think remembering off the top of my head, I think this was a Princeton study, might have been Stanford, but they were looking at people's habits, and they were asking people. They would ask people like they'd ask like with this study in particular with going to church, right? They would go to these different churches and ask people as they were coming out if their happiness levels were. If they were happier, as happy, as they were going in, or like less happy. And they would ask that for people coming out of the gym, and they would ask that for people coming out of the movie theater, and they like all these different activities. And one of the activities that was the highest on the list, right? So people, would 76%, I don't have the study in front of me, but it's all in the book. Let's say it was 50% of people coming out of the movie theater said that they were happier, coming out than they were going in, or 78% of people, leaving the gym were happier leaving than when they were going in. Right. And it but the highest percentage, the highest percentage of reported feelings of increased happiness, right? That's what it was. The reported feeling increased happiness was was from people going to church, and that when they were leaving church, they reported being happier than having not gone. And, so that was the number amongst all of these things that you probably want to do. Like that was the number one thing. And I just think there's something like like human beings, we're not all as different as we'd like to think that we are. Get a good night's sleep, read, go to mass, like, call your mom and talk to her for 20 minutes on your way home. Like, you just do these little things. Mm-hmm. It's going to make you happy. And church is one of those things that I wish more people just, if you go, you're going to be happy you went. It's going to make you, it's going to make you happier than if you don't do it. And it's one of the easiest things you can do. Just show up, go to church, sit there, leave. It requires next to nothing of you. As compared to, a lot of the other stuff. So
yeah, totally. And there's, it's funny as you're talking about this, I was thinking just about all the masses that I've been to where the music is terrible or the homily is uninspiring or the priest, it's a daily mass and the priest just skips a homily entirely or whatever, or the readings just happen to be, like Jesus' genealogy that day or something where you're like, oh boy, okay, all the names. That's all we're getting for the readings today is names. And it's not even about that. It's not even about the excellence of the preaching or any of that. Although that certainly helps to create a transformative experience, and it's very important, but it's just the fact of putting yourself in God's presence. And the fact that you are returning to the sacrament. And I think that's such an interesting statistic because what is it? Something like 70% of Catholics don't even believe in the real presence.
Right.
What an amazing thing. And maybe this was a Christian study. Maybe this wasn't even Catholic specifically, but still there's a power of putting yourself in God's presence can do things for you that you don't know what you're going to receive. Even if you know that priest is going to give an uninspiring homily, you're still gaining so much from just putting yourself in. That's great. Yeah. So, all right. I don't want to leave. We've talked about a lot of different theoretical things, and that is awesome. What should people who are listening to this, besides buying your book and reading it right now, which everyone should do, what should people who want to be happier start doing right now after they listen to this podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, buy the book, of course, and listen to your podcast, which they're already doing. So they're well on their way to like living happier. I would say, if I could, get people to do one thing that I think will increase their overall happiness and their experience of happiness and set them down on the path, towards, living that happier life. Just take 10 minutes today and find some space and some time for silence and just do that today. And then do that tomorrow and then try to do that every day. I mean, I think that is one of those compounding things that if you just do that, it has a compounding benefit in many different areas of your life. Don't try to do anything during that silence. Let it be a total waste of time. You'll get distracted. I always just tell you people when you get distracted, when you're in silence, just focus on your breathing. Count in for 4, hold it for 6, count out for 8. And do that over and over again. When you get distracted, it just gives you something to focus on. That's very simple. And try not to think about anything. Try not to do anything. I even what I will try to do is is just focus on the breathing and pick something to stare at and don't move a muscle. So you're literally trying to do as little as possible and just be in silence for 10 minutes. You do that. I think you'll be well on your way to happiness. And there's a lot more to that than you can do, but that's a good place to start.
Love it. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dominick. It's been wonderful chatting with you. I just want to encourage everyone to buy your book. And there is, if you use the code CALLED, you can click on the link in the show notes and get 15% off, which is amazing. I love a deal. And even if there wasn't a deal,
I don't think they've ever done that. I've done a few different interviews, and I think you are the first. Your people are the first ever that are going to get this discount code. So that's pretty cool.
That should make everyone feel special.
They are. They should. They are special, and they should feel special. So ascensionpress.com/happiness. Very easy to remember. ascensionpress.com/happiness. When you check out online, and you put in that word "called," and you get your discount.
Awesome.
That should make you happy.
Yeah, that makes me happy. Saving money is one of my passions.
Saving money is so funny. I will drive I will drive. If I know that a mile down the road, there's a gas station that is 2 cents cheaper per gallon, yes. I will drive a mile down the road to get to the other one. But if I'm at Target and I'm looking at like this, whatever, and I look at my phone and I'm like, oh, well, this is $15 cheaper on Amazon. But I'm here now. I'll just buy it now. My like money saving desire just makes absolutely no sense. But people love saving money in general, and this is a way that you can save 15%. So
I always think it's funny because I do the same thing. But then as I'm driving to the gas station that's farther away, I'm like, you know what? I'm burning all the gas, the money, the gas money that I would have saved by going to the farther away gas station. So that's food for thought too. That's a nice little rabbit hole to let your mind go down. Well, thank you so very much. What a wonderful chat. And I can't wait to get this out to my listeners. It's going to add a lot of value to their lives. So I want to thank you for all of your deep thought and your research and all the love that you poured into the fundamental theory of happiness and this podcast interview.
Thanks so much. It was really a pleasure. I had a ton of fun. Awesome. This was awesome.
I want to thank you once again so much for listening and tuning in today. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I feel like a kid in a candy store every time I get to release one of these episodes. So please, if you know someone who would like this episode, please feel free to let them know about it. I also love hearing from you guys. If you guys have any questions that you would like one of my expert guests to answer on the podcast about discerning a life choice, head on over to stacysummerow.com. Feel free to drop me a line. God bless you for these next 2 weeks. And, I'm praying for our country, I'm praying for everyone around the world who is lonely or in need of prayers. So just know that I'm holding you close in prayer. Cannot wait to see you around for another episode. God bless you guys. Bye.